Does your startup or small business culture really mean anything? Can business culture really grow sales? Business culture is really about how you treat people, but for many businesses, it's not something they think about, change, or improve. Is your business culture something that is holding back your business success? We're going to discuss business culture and how it affects your growth on this month's ScreamingBox Podcast. Please like our podcast and subscribe to our channel to get notified when next month's podcast is released.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
ScreamingBox Technology and Business Rundown!
How to grow your startup and jumpstart your sales. What is your company's business culture, and how can you use it to grow your business? Welcome to the ScreamingBox Technology and Business Rundown Podcast. In this month's podcast, my co-host, Botond Seres, and I, Dave Erickson, are going to get some culture this month by talking to Russel Dubree, founder of Performance Faction. Russel is a well-respected business coach who is insanely passionate about helping business owners scale their business in a way that brings profit, purpose, and meaning to their lives. After a tour as an officer in the United States Air Force and a few other startups in between, he co-founded the digital agency Lifeblue. After 15 years, he sold a majority stake in the company in 2017 at an 8-figure valuation. Near the end of 2021, he felt his time as a digital agency operator had reached its end and decided to focus on helping other business owners create successful businesses that are profitable, sustainable, and built to last. To this end, he started Performance Faction Consulting to help businesses reach their full potential by setting up the right foundations and business cultures needed for success. Today, we are going to discuss business culture and how it affects your growth, from startup to sales, how to make growth happen. So, Russel, an impressive history. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered it very well, Dave. Thank you for having me on the show. Excited to talk about all things culture, and looking forward to the conversation.
Let's start off with business culture. Maybe you can describe to our listeners, what do you think business culture means and is?
Yeah, I mean, a very, very nebulous term, and you can, as I have a talk I give, and I tell people you can go on Google and get several hundred definitions, but I really just liken culture to the collective behaviors in the business or the cumulative unacceptable or acceptable behaviors that exist in a business. So at a very behavioral level, right? And that's probably one of the challenges in business, that is very this squishy, intangible definition. So I'd say the first start is, right, how do we define it in a way that people can understand?
So what role do you think leadership plays in shaping and nurturing a healthy business, Russell?
I don't know if this is fortunately or unfortunately, but pretty much everything. I mean, the business is ultimately going to follow where the leadership takes it. And I help a lot of small businesses, and that's one of even the challenges that small business have in scaling is, right, if you're in a small business, you can kind of just get it all done because you've got that capability, that skill, you're highly motivated, highly ambitious, and then you hit that wall, and then now it's about people movement. How do we share these behaviors that are positive, that are going to help the business grow, from every level, right? Just from not only the delivery, but to how we get work done and internal processes and things like that. So the leader has to lead the way in all those different things. And the more and more that business grows, making sure that they do that in thinking in terms of the people, not just the bottom line in dollars. I think that's what happens a lot in business today is it's too much. How is this going to affect sales? How is this going to affect expenses? And just going straight to those answers versus how do we get this group of people to provide more value and be more valuable to them in that process as well.
Right. So do I gather correctly that you believe in leading by example in these questions?
I mean, that's just a given. I think I feel like I've gone through the University of Leadership. I did ROTC at college, and spent some time as an officer in the United States Air Force. And let me tell you one thing you get hammered real fast on is if you didn't lead by example and show. It had to be a team first mentality in your leader, especially coming in as a a young lieutenant and being over people that had been in the Air Force for 20 years. If you didn't lead with a people first mindset and by example, you were going to get your lunch handed to you real fast.
A lot of startups are started by a wide variety of people. And sometimes startups, are started by a group of engineers or an engineering person, not really people with much experience in leadership or running a company, but they come up with a product idea and they say, let's make a company out of it. So in that situation, you're kind of thrusting someone who may be an introvert or maybe not somebody who's even understands management theory or anything like that into the role of CEO or leader of the company. What kind of advice do you have for somebody like that who, doesn't necessarily have leadership skills? What should they be kind of focusing on to become better leaders?
Leadership is certainly a journey, right? I'm not the leader I am today that I was when I was younger, or I should say, right, that I'm a far better leader. And I think honestly, the first part for business owners is empathy. I think because we're ambitious, because we, maybe have this idea and right, we're highly invested, we got a lot of motivation behind this, that we forget others aren't just so naturally inclined to that. They've got their own personal interests in mind and what they're trying to achieve with their life. So ultimately it's empathy for that understanding that, they're not going to put in 100 hours per your business just out the gate unless you inspire them to do so. So I think empathy just goes a long way, that this is a people movement journey, and how do we bring along others? We have to show that we care about them. So I think along with empathy comes care, that if we care about the best interests of people involved in this process, that's going to guide us to a lot of the right decisions, especially as I make the analogy a lot when money decisions come into play. Oh gosh, what this money decision is going to have a very adverse effect on people, but when we really take a people first mentality and like I said, again, that empathy approach, it often just guides us to the right answers. And I think and what I speak about too a lot is it was that transition when we decided we needed to stop focusing on just revenue expenses. How do we survive? But really, how do we create an environment where people can thrive? And I didn't have all the answers when I asked that question the first time, but just simply asking that question and going down that path was pretty instrumental, I think, in turning the business around.
I mean, that's an interesting paradigm. That on one side, a leader has to assure that whoever they are leading set out and perform the task ahead of them. But on the other end, they also have to enable that team to work well together. One thing I have found during my professional career, I have yet to play a professional leadership role, I'll be honest with you, Russell. But one thing that I found is it is incredibly effective to just focus on the small things, like sort of like a psychologist would do, like always leading with the same question, like how are you, not hey, I need you to do this.
Right.
I'm sure that you have a much better explanation for this than I could ever give. So
yeah, I mean, right, if we go back to that definition of cultures, it's behaviors. Behaviors are not massive concepts, right? Behaviors are the smallest of things, to the point saying hi. I had a business owner in my podcast not too long ago, and they said a huge turning point in their business was they used to show up every day in their office, and they would go straight to their office, put their head down, and get started on work. And then, I don't remember how they arrived at this epiphany, but they're like, I'm going to stop and I'm going to say hi to people. And right in that process, she learned more about them. And I think she basically said this was the turning point in her business when she started saying hi to people as she came into the office every day. And right, so many positive outcomes we could assume would fall out of that, right? You understand your team, you have more again, going back to empathy, right? This is all a relationship game. And then the other thing I think is, right, yes, this very task-driven mentality. I think, again, a lot of times business owners are very ambitious. How do we just move on to the next thing? Not necessarily maybe always slow down and think, okay, this is a people thing. We will move faster in the end if we bring others along with us. And so I'm a big believer in even just the one-on-one where, if I talk to a lot of business owners, they say in those one-on-one meetings they have, it's, well, what are you working on? What's going to be coming next? All these very, again, task-oriented things. But those conversations really should just be about the growth of that individual. Where are you at in your career? What are obstacles from the next place you're at? And how do we work together on solving those? Is there a new responsibility you need? So many things can come out of those questions if we just say, this is about growth, not how to get work done. That's all. As humans, I think we're always incentivized to get tasks done at the end of the day, but can we be inspired to achieve at a higher level? That's very different than, very, very operational task-based conversations.
As someone who's started several businesses like yourself, I definitely understand the concept of different people have different responses. And I do think that particularly like the first business I had to run, the focus was on the people, but more on the focus was on the work that people were doing. And that for some people actually works really well. They prefer to be treated that way. And other people start missing the other aspect of it, right? And if I made a mistake in running a business, I was focusing too much on the tasks versus the people. And then obviously the second business, I said, okay, let's focus more on the people. And as you learn these things, you grow, and now the focus is all on the people. And sometimes I err on the other side, which is not getting the task done. So it's again a balancing act of letting people do what they want versus giving them guidance. So maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that in, say, small businesses or small startups. There's usually a small team of 3 or 4 people. Their personalities may not line up. How would you what advice do you have for those type of companies of balancing out those personalities and getting them kind of moving more along in the same direction?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dave. And I think this was a big learning experience for us in that growth journey. And I don't even know if I maybe described it in the practice, but just to even understand how I kind of even came to all this. For our first 5 years in business, we probably got to about $1 million in revenue, but we were this close to just failing at any given day. I think our doors were likely to shut, and then we, as I said, kind of some of these philosophy changes, mindset changes, the epiphany went off, and we had some pretty fast growth there, and then eventually sold the company for an 8-figure exit. So all this to just give some credibility to some of the concepts we're discussing here. But this is where I think is the big struggle for small businesses. You probably start out hiring who you can get, not maybe always who is the best fit for the culture and the environment. And that's a really tough struggle to navigate, right? You don't have a lot of budget just to go and get anybody on your team. So a lot of times your budget's constricted, and even just as you mentioned earlier, you haven't done this before in terms of hiring and how to bring people on your team. But ultimately, if you can get to this point, and the sooner the better, right? If we hire people on the values, based upon the values of the company, and certain traits that we say are really important for people that are going to work there, they can have some of those personality idiosyncrasies, and I don't think it's not going to really be a problem in the environment. But if there's fundamental values that I think are misaligned or off, that's going to be tough. And I think that's sometimes where you see some of those issues, right? And let's just take a fundamental one that we were very important about this. We wanted people that wanted to learn and grow. And so we always even just said, hey, if you're not better from when you are today, 2 years from now, then you're probably not the type of person from this company. If you just want to come in, do your tasks, and get off, it's not about, I want to make you work 100 hours. That's just about saying, I want to be the best developer possible. I want to be the best designer possible. And so, right, that's a values thing. Some people do just want to check those boxes, and there might be an environment that's perfectly great, but that wasn't going to work in our environment. So how do, again, gets back to just values alignment and bringing people on the team that share, at least at some level, some core set of values that are very similar.
I mean, it's really important to have a team where the core values, the core beliefs of the people on there are a good match, or at least a decent match. But even if those values are misaligned, it is possible to remedy the situation by molding the culture to account for all of these different points of view. And I do wonder if you have any particularly fun examples of situations like this.
And I think that's probably, again, a tough thing from a small culture versus a large culture. A larger culture, when, those beliefs are shared widely across the board, I think people can assimilate and kind of be inspired and learn, like, oh, maybe this is a better way for me to operate, or I'm inspired to for whatever things. But going back to a small culture, one person can dominate so much of the behaviors of that group. And so that's what just makes it all the more, I guess you could say, fragile at a smaller level versus a higher level. But downside, right, is a larger company, if they've got some maybe negative aspects in there, it's a lot harder to reorient them. But I'd say at the end of the day, it just all comes back to behaviors, and focus on a behavior level. If you say learning and development is important and you want people to grow, are you putting your money where your mouth is, and what do you have in place to show that? So, for example, in our company, since that was such a big component, everyone had a learning and development budget for a relatively small company. I know that's some of these things are things large companies just have out the gate because they can throw money at it, but that was a big expense for us to give everyone, $2,000 a year to say, go learn something with this. That's kind of free money for you to go do that. We held, this is pre-pandemic, so we're still all in the office, but every week we called it Lifeblue University, and brought people in, and we had lunch brought in, and we'd bring speakers in, and that would range from development related topics to cybersecurity and how to set up a server and things like that, to things that were just complete outside the box, right? Nutritionists, fitness experts, financial experts, just to help people with the total person concept. And then sometimes just inspirational. We brought in a very interesting gentleman that collected homeless signs, or signs from homeless people, and sometimes he'd pay for them. So he had this entire art collection, and he talked about just this whole journey of this whole process. And everybody, some people were practically in tears. They were just inspired, right? So it was a culture of learning and caring and kind of total person. But it had to be, we didn't just say that. We didn't just kind of put our foot down and say, this is what we're going to do. We put our money behind the behaviors in the business that match what we were trying to accomplish there. And it absolutely changed some people. I wouldn't say not maybe revolutionary, but I think people got on board that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been.
In starting a business, particularly small startups, but also SMBs don't do a lot of this stuff in the beginning. Some businesses do. They sit down and they write out their mission statement, and then they write out, okay, our business culture, these are the points that we really want about our business and how we want to run it and treat people. And they're very detailed about that. And usually those companies are run by people who are very detailed oriented. And that's great. But many businesses that I've talked to, they don't have any of that. They don't even think about it when they started the business. They're just so focused on, okay, product is ready. We got to get it here, and we got to start marketing. We got to start selling. And they start getting into the nuts and bolts of the business. I think it might be much harder later to correct that, to all of a sudden you've been running the business in a certain way, and then all of a sudden a year later, we really should kind of have a value statement and a mission statement, and let's get everybody together and talk about what's important to them and that type of stuff. How important is it? Does it really matter? Do you think that you need to start off with a very precise or set up or flushed out mission statement and value statement and all that type of stuff? Or is it okay to start the business and then a year later try to do it? What do you think works best for you?
That's a really good question. And I don't know if I have like the very pointed, specific answer. And because one of the things people have made all different types of businesses work with all different types of manners and still get to the same power, even if we're just talking about good culture businesses. I think if I look back on my own journey, at least to have at least a waypoint, right? The notion of if we take a compass and we just say we can go in any direction, that's not as good as just we're going to head north. And I don't know exactly where north is yet or where my waypoint is, but just having some ideas and some of those thoughts written on paper, I think is at least maybe a good starting point, even if you maybe just don't even have an idea of what you all want that to be in the long run. And the reality is the business is the business is probably, especially when it's a smaller startup, it's going to naturally inherit the values and those traits and the mission and the purpose of the owner. And it's over time where the business culture itself starts to separate from the owner, especially if they don't manage it maybe to the right way. And so I think that's why sometimes culture can be bad in startups. It can be good and bad. Is that right? There a lot of times the dream of someone starts a business, they have, they want to make money, and right, it's part of even staying in business is the survival game of making money. So I think that's what becomes the driving force of the culture if we don't really set it otherwise. I mean, a business has to survive, it has to make money. That's the fuel for growth.
Russell, for you personally, what does the following expression mean? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
That I've started hearing that a lot more recently, and I think that is a really good way to describe I think in all this chaos of a business environment, especially a startup environment, is go, 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 get it done, get it done, get it done. And you miss out so many pieces, right? Again, a lot of times owner driven. The owner might have the talent to go 100 miles an hour, but maybe the intern or some of these other employees don't have the skills or the ability, or again, goes back to maybe even motivation to go 100 miles an hour. And so while you might solve some challenges, you're going to create a lot of fires in your wake. And so I think that's just the company in the long run is only as good as how fast the team can go, not how fast any one individual can go. And so ultimately the whole business goes faster when slow. And I think that's why slow is smooth. You have the time to focus on attention to detail. You have the time to focus on process. You have the time to focus on people. And in the long run, those people are getting better, more empowered along that path. And then eventually that smooth is where it becomes fast. I think that's how it at least correlates into I think in the same way, right? Coming from the military reference, if you are taking a building, let's say in the military, and you just rush in, guns blazing and everything like that, we know we can imagine how chaotic that would be versus taking the time, going through it the right way, that ultimately you'll probably get to the same or better result faster than all the chaos that might ensue otherwise.
Right. I think you bring up a great point there, motivation, that so many people miss. Like, I don't know if you, Dave, or you, Russell, saw these CEO meltdowns a couple months ago, where they just fail to grasp the concept that they, as the owner, have the motivation to move the company towards a 8-figure or 9-figure exit, while the intern, earning literally nothing, may not share that motivation and may not be inclined to work 16-hour days. And I feel like there's a disconnect there. And I wonder if you have any good tips to sort of internalize this concept of vastly different levels of motivation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one, it's just is the constant reminder. They've done so many studies now and proved that money is a relatively low motivating factor. And there's even more studies that the more complicated work is, or the type of work someone's doing, it's actually demotivating to try to just throw money at incentives. So it works great if, I'm making widgets, right? I can move so much more faster if you pay me more to make more widgets. I know the exact, I guess, there's a term I didn't create this up, but success is the ability to match effort and reward. But when that is big and complicated and nebulous, people don't know how to work harder to, even grasp that financial incentive that might be in place anyway. And so I think this just comes down to fundamental needs. What are people's needs? That's what's going to motivate them. They want to be a part of something. They want to belong. They want to contribute. This is a fundamental need we have as human beings. And right, they want to be successful. They want to feel like they're contributing, and they have their own mission and values and things. And this gets back to value alignment. And if they can do that in their work, that's going to be inspiring. This is going to be motivating towards them. But if just someone is just telling them work harder, throw money, and they really don't know what that means, you have so many more unintended consequences in terms of what their activity is going to be. They're going to be thinking they might be doing something really good. And so even get back to your question, from the intern to, every level, are we meeting the needs of why that person is there? And right, interns have a different set of needs than a senior executive or something like that. But again, if we can align these together and everyone, honestly, if we just think about this, we can't expect someone to just want what we want. We have to meet them in the middle, and maybe that's just how I will net out that answer is meet people in the middle with what their needs might be, create places for them to fulfill those needs, and I think you solve a lot of that along the way.
I mean, it's definitely easier when you're a small company to be able to, look at, even understand or know the needs of the people you're working with, your employees, and some of them are doing tasks that are redundant and don't have a lot of flexibility in them because they're very mechanical or whatever. But other tasks, some owners are very micromanagey and want to manage every aspect of a worker's work, whether it's doing something mechanical or whether it's creative or whatever. And some owners are able to give their, you're the expert, you go do it, and I trust you kind of way of doing it. When you're small, that's relatively easy. Obviously, when you refer to your employee as employee number 3672, can you please, do this? And you're pretty big at that point. That scalability, how do you take a business that's small and personal and the relationships are very close, and as you grow and start scaling up, how do you keep it so that you can still motivate them, not just with money, but with relationship and treating them well?
That's a challenge I almost want to go figure out how to solve at some point. I think we do have our examples out there. So one of the things, we were registered B Corp, if you're familiar with that concept, but if for those that aren't and listening, that's basically, it's a collective out there that measures its members that say we balancing profit and purpose. And so we're not just about the dollar, but here's all the things we've proven that we have in place that say, we're kind of about this concept. And so if it starts, I think it starts at the top. I mean, I think that was what Botond mentioned earlier, right? It starts with the top and that trickles down. And I think if I'm being honest, I'd say we have a lot of leaders in businesses at a lot of different levels, especially the larger the organization, that got there not because of their ability to move, inspire, or grow people, but because of some other skill they have. And then when you have a collective of leaders throughout the entire organization where that's their currency, that's their value, that's what they're after, you kind of get what you get, I think, in terms of the overall culture. And so we were really big, and I know that, is people need to be in leadership and management positions that are excellent at guiding and managing and growing other people. That really is where I think the net comes down to. We still need our hard chargers and our dynamic people that have these skill sets, but I oftentimes don't know that they need to be in kind of management or even true leadership positions, because that's, I think that's just going to affect culture in a negative way in the long run. Because they're not, not to give a blanket label. I know we're talking about a big concept here, but a lot of times those people don't really know how to achieve success through others. They only know how to achieve success through themselves.
Someone who's doing a creative role like ad creation or marketing has one kind of style. Sales is a completely different one, right? Sales are all about motivation, and they use money as a reward, but really, to keep sales motivated, you have to hear no a lot of times. And so managing salespeople must be very different. And some businesses, the sales are all done by the owners initially. If an owner has a startup and they want to kind of grow their sales, that's a personality thing and a culture thing as well, not just finding a salesperson. Is that correct?
5,000 years ago, right? People on the frontier, right? So we needed all these different roles. We need the challenger that's going to go in and not right. And then we need, the peacemakers at home to keep everybody together. And then, we need all these different personality types and roles. And so they all fit into the system. And to the extent sales, right? That is a different personality type than the person doing very creative work. They are inspired by a completely different type of thing, right? This just gets back to where they need to hold some of the same values, but we can lead those people differently when we understand these different personality types and how they operate and what their needs are. I think just even knowing that works as well.
realizing the differences in both needs and motivating factors. But I think that we can add on top of that to also realize the commonalities on both sides. So let's say that I, as an employee, I would like to earn more and spend less. However, you as a CEO also would like to earn more and spend less, and these two value systems have an inherent conflict built in. And I do wonder how these can affect certain aspects of the culture, like how to mitigate or how to mediate these conflicts.
Yeah, you might be the number one crux there of all challenges in business right there, is if everybody wants to make the most and the least amount of input or resources or effort, how do we align that? I think the first thing is results. And I think that's probably a lot of the problem, and especially, right, we're going down a technology path in the business world, right? We're far past the industrial age as being the main piece of, I guess you could say, to label this time period we're in. And so, the industrial age mentality says have results, you actually have to be there doing the work. There was no automation, there was no work smarter, not harder. You just had to do that. So I think it's more about embracing results and measuring on that, not how long someone's working or anything along those lines. I mean, that's the scary thing I'm hearing in this kind of post-pandemic, companies trying to get return to the office and all these mechanisms they've tried to put in place just to make sure someone is sitting in a seat, or whatever is the scary part of that. But it's not too hard to just say, if I just measure your results, and if you can get those results done in an hour, I don't care what you're doing, the other 7 hours of the day or something along those lines. The same way a customer doesn't care if you achieved results for them and it took you 1 minute, they're going to pay for that value. So it is and isn't complicated, but I think, again, we've set up all these practices that are built around someone being present, not results-based.
People got used to having a certain level of freedom and responsibility during the pandemic working remotely. And now a lot of companies are saying, wait a minute, I got this office building I'm paying rent on or own or whatever, and I need to fill it with people. So go back to work. I've actually talked to some developers. They're fairly high level developers, and they say that developers from other companies call them saying, hey, do you have a job at your place? Because my place wants me to go back into an office, and I don't want to go back into an office anymore. So all of a sudden there's kind of this, and again, it's a small percentage of the workforce. It's not everybody, but 10 or 20% of the workforce has decided they don't want to go back to an office, right? And so small businesses could use that as a way of gaining people that they couldn't normally get by offering remote work. But there's still a lot of people who are running businesses who aren't comfortable trying to manage remote workers, right? Our business, everybody's been remote from the beginning, so we're very comfortable with it. But there are a lot of people and a lot of companies who feel the only way to, quote, control people or manage people is to have them in their office so that they're there. I don't know, that's kind of part of the business culture, right? That a business can decide, okay, maybe we don't need everybody in, and who gets to be remote and who has to come in and that type of stuff. That's probably one of the bigger challenges facing businesses right now, right?
I mean, it's definitely been a hot topic, and I think I fell into the camp that you couldn't pay me to go back to an office every single day. And right, I was the owner of a company that showed up to an office every single day. And one of the things pre even remote work being a commonplace thing was I was how inspired by that. Actually, the things a remote business has to solve to be successful is the same things an in-person business needs to solve to be successful. We just get fooled with our eyes and kind of this butts and seats mentality. But again, a remote business has to be more results-based in order to survive anyway. Otherwise, we see the hacks I've seen on TikTok and stuff like that people create to how to feign or fake being productive or something along those lines. Like that's, people are going to go where they're incentivized, but if their job depends on hitting a result, they're going to do what they need to do to hit that result. And the better we can measure what that's going to be out the gate, the more successful our business is going to be at any level, any size overall. Stop measuring on things that aren't right. A button seat is not providing value. Some measurable metric or thing in place that's going to say, were you successful today or were you not, is a far better way to operate.
Yeah, I feel like you really hit the nail on the head with that one, since the only reason these hacks can exist, like the mouse jigglers and whatever else, is because even in remote environments, we are looking at like, oh, is it green on Teams? Oh, it's not green. Why? Who cares? I mean, maybe someone is just trying to think about stuff and goes for a walk, but no, the way we measure presence is just, is it green on Teams? Yes, good, it's working.
Yeah.
Are there any results from that day? Maybe not. Maybe yes.
Yeah.
But that is much less taken into consideration, I find, and still, but just, I'm gonna go totally off topic here, but this future where AI is creating art and people are stuck doing menial jobs is not the future I imagined as a wee lad.
Yeah, right.
It's very far from what I imagined.
AI and what roles it's playing in businesses, it's almost like your business culture nowadays has to kind of start including that. A very good example is the writers' strike that's occurring in Hollywood. They're striking, part of one of their demands is they don't want AI to do some of the writing, right? And the studios are like, well, we want that option. And so employees fear new things and fear change. I look at AI as just a tool that allows people to become more productive, but people doing work see AI as a threat to their job, which it may be in some cases. And in other cases, if it's an opportunity to grow and be more valuable. But I think that's something that in business culture, businesses have to take a look at of, how do they want to have AI involved in their business and what role does it play?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, we're still in this topsy-turvy nature of AI and what's going to be long-term effects going to be. And, I was at a conference recently, and the most passionate discussion at this whole conference was the topic of AI and all that. But I think we all kind of netted out and agreed and said, this is a tool, and tools historically have not eliminated jobs, they've morphed jobs. And I think that's really where AI is going to play out, as well as we're still going to need humans to do things. It's just what the human portion of that is just going to change with AI. It's going to make things faster. I mean, it's certainly going to cause a shift in the amount of, if nothing else, the amount of content that gets produced, because it can happen in an instant versus, some humans do take time to do things. But I might be worried, I guess, in saying from a workforce perspective, if I'm below average and then this machine can come on and instantly do better than me, but that means I have to morph myself in that, right? How can I basically, I always say, net out, better embrace this, not fight it, because it's coming and it's going to, it's just like whether I liken it to the web, 20 years ago. Where we were so worried that, Wix and things like that were going to put us out of business because people could just go build websites themselves. But it's far from that. It might create a little bit lower floor that someone would get in without paying another company, but found out real quickly, if you want a good website, you can't make that in Wix. You can't do that yourself. You still need, how you structure. And right now we have roles like UI, UX, and all these things. We've added that process versus just your developer in the basement of their house that can kind of do it all, put it all together. 20 years ago.
It's a very interesting evolution about how these business tools come into a business. The advertising industry was like that. They were grappling with banner ads and website advertising, and all of a sudden smartphones came along, and they were like, "Oh my God, what's this going to do to our industry? It's going to kill us." And they're not going to do traditional advertising, and it just gave them a new opportunity to learn and grow. And those agencies that understood it and learned how to do mobile advertising grew, right?
Yeah.
And those that didn't. And I think it's kind of a similar situation.
Oh, I was just going to say, history has shown at this point, right? Those that fight change die. I think of Blockbuster Video. I mean, they were just dead set on that, people were going to go into a store and rent videos and things like that for eternity. Well, and right, I'm sure you've maybe heard they had the opportunity to buy Netflix for, a thousandth of a fraction of what it's worth today. And then, just a direct comparison there, look at Netflix and how they evolved from, I'm sending you a DVD to, what Netflix is today. I mean, I don't know a single person, honestly, too often that doesn't have a Netflix subscription. And so yeah, history has proven you cannot fight it. You better figure out how to embrace it.
How often do businesses need to reevaluate their business culture? Is that like a continuous thing, or once a year, or only when things change, or what do you think?
I mean, I think that, we've heard the saying, culture eats strategy for lunch or whatever. I think that's culture is going to exist or not exist depending on what you do or don't do. It is. So the question then becomes, yes, I think I liken it to, right, in a startup mindset, the owner has to wear many hats out the gate. There's no avoiding that. But it is not too far into the business where I think their importance does become on managing and focusing on the culture. How is it evolving? And is it evolving in the direction that it needs to versus not? And really just having your thumb on that. I would say, even as low as 15 to 20 people, if your business is focused on that, I have to, maybe I need to do some study someday that you would be far more successful than if you're still trying to do all the sales or do all this one piece that, and then something else is, culture. Oftentimes it can get completely ignored, and then it, like I said, it's going to grow some direction one way or another. Is it the direction you want or not?
I mean, personally, I think culture is a thing that needs to be constantly reevaluated, like just how we do in real life. I mean, outside of business, culture is changing by the day. It was just a few decades ago that many of the social practices that are 100% accepted now were absolutely taboo. Like, I don't want to bring up anything too controversial, but I'm just going to say the one example which is very apparent in today's society is we used to have insane asylums, and we decided that that was a terrible idea, and let's just give those people jobs and give them a place in society. But with every culture change, there are good sides and bad sides. And I think one of the things we lack as, I say we, but I mean you or anyone else who actually leads, is a good set of criteria to evaluate future culture changes that we would like to implement.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, right, who could have predicted the pandemic and the massive change? Obviously, hopefully we don't have cataclysmic events like that too often. But yes, right, to the whole point, we've seen it so much. And I think in this information age we're living in, we've seen it change on such a, I think far faster than we can actually comprehend as humans. If you just only compare it to the first several thousand years of modernized society. And so, yeah, I think if nothing else, the cultural trait that will adapt and play well the best over the upcoming years is the ability to adapt, the ability to learn quickly, embrace new things. And if nothing else, maybe that's what companies should focus on: is how do we adapt? How do we be an environment where we're learning? And woe to the businesses that want to fight and make things like they used to be, or any group or out there. Good luck, I say to that.
Some people welcome change and want change. Some people, change comes along, they really don't want change. They like it the way it is. You mentioned something in the history of, I think it was Lifeblue was your agency.
Yes.
I think it's something that is similar to many businesses. They build the business, they get it to a point, and it kind of plateaus, right? year after year. They can't seem to grow the sales. They can't seem to grow the business. Maybe they don't want to. Some businesses are just happy chugging along and making the money they're making. But other businesses are like, I would like to grow my business. I don't know how, or something's happened. With your company, you kind of reached that point, right? You said that it kind of grew to a certain point and that stayed there. And then all of a sudden you had explosive growth. In that period of growth, did something change in your business culture that helped you grow or to make that growth happen? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how that happened and maybe how other businesses can kind of stimulate their growth by doing that.
Yeah, and I focus a lot of my work today on the agency space, so I definitely understand, at least from a kind of a thought level, professional, technological service perspective, how a business ecosystem works. I think across all business, a lot of same principles apply, but I'll be reticent to say, that's 100% true, just because I have not gone and experienced in manufacturing or some other space like that. But I think we talked a little bit earlier. It was that epiphany that just said, look, people, we don't have a machine that we can fix and operate and it's going to spit out 1,000 more widgets per se. We have this group of people that are doing the work. That, for lack of a better term, is our machine. And so just like any machine you have to take care of that. You have to give it the latest technology. You have to, repair it when it seems broken or something's not quite working right. And you have to give it the right input so it's going to put out the right product if we just kind of break this down to its simplest components. So it goes back to just asking that question, how does that look like, right? And there's a lot more business theory that even exists, 12 years ago when we were going about this process of how people are motivated and work, again, moving out of this industrial age mindset. So I do a talk on, it's called the 8 Keys to High Performance Culture. And I think if we could really just start one, culture is more than just fun. I think you have a lot of companies out there that say, we do happy hours and we have these get-togethers and we make jokes at work, and we have a great culture. And that's a part of culture. That is not the culture. Because at the end of the day, if that's all that's going on in the business, then we're not producing results. We're not growing people. We're not developing them. So it's all the other things. Do we have integrity in the business, trustworthiness? Do we have transparency? Are we showing how the business is performing? Do we have accountability? Do we measure how we're performing? And those are a few. So there's several elements to culture beyond just having fun. And I think at any given time, if you have a business that's maybe hitting a plateau, back to your original question, you've probably got something that either hasn't scaled in that right from an element of culture, or just simply needs some refining based upon where the business has grown to, or something that it's achieved.
Most businesses, it's either a supply issue, they can't produce enough, they can't make enough, they can't do enough, or it's the sales side. They don't have enough sales. They don't have enough income. They don't have, some businesses is both, where they have both challenges, but usually most businesses, it seems to be on one side or another. If it's on the supply side, that's more internal, or in the case of, supply chain issues, it may not be internal. And on the sales side, yes, it could be internal. You don't have a salesperson and you need a salesperson, or it could be on the marketing side. You're not getting enough incoming leads or things like that. But from a culture standpoint, again, people are motivated. So if you do have somebody who knows the business, they may not think they're a salesperson. If you work with them and motivate them, they may try it and they may be successful at it, right? Versus trying to hire somebody outside who doesn't know anything about your business and they just come in and try to do something, right?
Yeah.
Most small businesses struggle with sales anyways, right?
Yeah, at a smaller scale, right, you're going to hit that. Right? What are your lead generation mechanisms? I think especially coming from a technology services business, is so many businesses get to a certain size just on referrals. Referrals aren't scalable in the long run in a business. They're a great component. You're probably doing decent work, maybe, most likely. But right, until you learn to actually market, you learn to have a specific target audience that you apply value to. That's going to be especially in a lot of the clients I work with, that's almost number one for all of them when they're not where they're at, where they want their business to be. And I think you solve some of those fundamental layers, right? How how to get your product done in a way that you can train somebody on, and how to generate your own leads. That'll take you a good long way. And then that's problems I haven't personally encountered yet, right? When you get to 100 million, what are your challenges to scale to get to 1 billion? Those are things I probably really haven't thought too much through yet.
There's obviously, different downsides and upsides to the way you get business. I mean, referrals tend to be more personal, so they have a lot more margin in them, whereas incoming leads tend to be more competitive because they're looking not just at you, but many other people. So there's a kind of a spectrum of that. I think that this idea of business culture, I think it's more powerful than people realize. And I think that, they really need, especially when starting a business, to focus more on it. Because I think that when you start your business and you know where you want to go and you know how you want your company to be, like you have a picture in your head, when my company's small, I want it to be like this, and we do these things. And I think that gives you a guide, whereas, I got a product, I just spent 2 years building it, and now I want to go to sell it and go to business. Let's start a business. And okay, partner, I've known you for a couple, days, and you look nice, and let's start a business together. And, I don't think that works very well. I think nowadays, even a small startup, you really need to be more methodical in how you start your business and more strategic in how you plan to go, because business culture kind of starts from the beginning. At least that's my feeling. And although it can develop and change, if you're starting with no thought on it, and a lot of people I think are starting businesses and they're not really thinking about it, or they think about it in a very abstract way, like, I'm going to start a business and I hope I make money, and if I make money, I'll donate this much % to this charity, right? And to them, that's maybe the level of business culture. I don't think a lot of people really think about, what type of people do I want in my business? How do I want them to act? Do I want a wide variety of people, or do I want a narrow type of people? Because I'm detailed oriented. I only want detailed oriented people in the business, which, has its strengths and weaknesses. So what do you think about how much a business should go into planning that and figuring out what type of people they want in their business?
Well, I think even, right, I mean, to the extent that it feels natural and maybe not forced as part of it, that's where maybe, you used an analogy earlier of let's go north versus let's go to this very specific GPS spot, or say, I mean, right, if we think of just traveling anywhere, the more specific spot that we know we're going to, the faster we will get there. We'll choose the fastest route, or the most efficient route, or whatever that case is. So the more specific you can be, I think it can be helped. But sometimes I think too, it's maybe not right to force it. I think sometimes when it comes to some of these things, they evolve themselves. I use the example of, we didn't start out the business with a purpose. And again, it goes back to sometimes maybe you just got to learn some of this stuff the hard way. But when we finally did create the purpose, and we used the term "save the world from bad design," and we didn't really even know what that meant at the time. We were just like, we want to build cool websites. But over time, that morphed into so much more, that not only did we want to build good websites, we wanted to design a good company. We wanted to be a place where people could thrive. And so that's what Save the World from Bad Design started. The meaning started to build upon itself. So just where I get back to maybe earlier, just have, to your point, and try to the least common denominator is, have some throw out some thoughts, and maybe see how those stick, and do those make sense, and even understand too. I think this is one thing when it comes to culture: is it aspirational or is it lived? And sometimes I think when people create values, they're maybe more aspirational than lived, and then we just have to understand what those behaviors take them from aspirational to lived, if it's not the way. And I think I made that mistake once in business, where it's like, all right, this is our culture. It wasn't our culture. It's what I wanted it to be. But it goes back to, you can't just say it, you've got to live it. So throwing some ideas and thoughts out there, and then figuring out what the behaviors you need to support them would always be a good first step in that thought process.
I think there's an expression for this, is to look after your backyard before you go international. But I've been wondering one thing: is it even possible for someone to build a healthy company culture, given that or when the person in question has absolutely neglected both their physical and mental health, which is something we see all the time with startups especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked earlier, it's lead by example, and you can't, and I think that gets back to, and I think this is where even business is evolving, is we have to think about the total person here. There's a lot of what I can't stand in the world is generational bashing. We all have our issues and pros, right, in terms of how we come up. But if we really have empathy for, let's just say, a younger generation out there that, I mean, they have had to live through this massive technology change and shift in how the world works. And guess what? The school system doesn't keep pace with that. And so really all these things that we expect or want, that, maybe if you're a little bit older, middle-aged or whatever business owner that you learned by trial by fire over 20 years of your career, they're simply walking into it unprepared, and just goes back to empathy, understanding where someone's at and what can my role be to, help them along this journey that they're in. And if my business can be a vehicle to do that, where I can provide value to customers, I can provide value to people in that construct, and think about this as human, not just a moneymaker thing, then, I think that's going to play out far better, especially as if we think of tech and the recruiting landscape gets so much more and more challenging every single day as we progress. I want to be seen as a company that makes people better, that cares about people, and that's going to ease the grease, so to speak, on how I can actually get people to come work here that might, even if I can't afford maybe this amazing salary, they're going to come work because they see it as a place that, understands this is a human thing.
So what services does Performance Faction provide, and how can people work with you?
Yeah, so this has been an evolution for me and right purpose, and I'll give the basic logistics of the company itself, but even talk about how my own purpose in this is formed over time. I do one-to-one coaching and consulting for agency business owners, typically small to medium size, so ranging from a handful of employees to on average 25, 50, and then or 25 to 30, sorry, and then different services for agencies down with that. But basically, they're stuck in some place, helping them get from where they're at to where they want to go, whatever that is. I'm not molding that for them. I'm letting them craft that themselves. But just be given, I've had a lot of experience in the agency space myself, and then getting to work with and talk with a lot of other creative and marketing service-oriented agencies. I've seen a lot of ways it's worked and hasn't worked, and getting to share that information, and in some ways even starting to build a community. Again, not only businesses that succeed from a monetary standpoint, but give back and live out this culture piece. And that's really where my mission, when I set out to do this, I didn't have all this lined out per se. One, I was just like, I need to go do something else. This sounds like a good idea. Cool. Let's go do this. But now my mission has grown, and I've thought this, but it's formed in terms of, I love small business. I think small businesses naturally embody so much of the things that we've talked about today. It's easier to embody some ways when we talk about culture than massive 1,000-person organizations. But, and I want to see more small businesses succeed. And beyond that, what you mentioned earlier, one of the challenges a lot of small businesses run into is the ability to generate leads and sales. Well, if I help make better marketing companies out there, where better marketing companies exist, there helps to kind of solve that transition to better small businesses or more successful small businesses. So that's even just how my purpose has evolved in such a relatively short amount of time, as I've been doing this for almost a couple years now.
Russel, thank you so much. You've given us some culture and some of your tips on creating a successful business culture that can help startups and SMBs grow. For our listeners, please join us in the first week of next month for another ScreamingBox and Technology Business Rundown podcast. Until then, keep eating yogurt and stay cultured. Thank you very much for taking this journey with us. Join us for our next exciting exploration of technology and business in the first week of every month. Please help us by subscribing, liking, and following us on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and please let us know any subjects or topics you would like us to discuss in our next podcast by leaving a message for us in the comment sections or sending us a Twitter DM. Till next month, please stay happy and healthy.